You're watching True Review. The following series is focused on one particular franchise, as it starts out as a rival to the granddaddy of FPS games, but will quickly turn into a huge commercial success. But this success was not to last, as the franchise would see a huge decline in its popular support, to which the entire series would almost fall into obscurity, only to be pulled from the brink in one last-ditched effort. This is the story of the Unreal franchise, and now it's time for the next chapter in our story. In the last video in the Unreal series, we saw the franchise at the height of its power with the smash hit game that was Unreal Tournament. Now it's time for the next chapter of the story. The franchise, making a ton of money off the last game, began to work on several different aspects. First of all, a sequel simply entitled Unreal Tournament 2 was drafted and put into the first stages of development, whilst alongside this, a new graphics engine was also being developed due to a breakthrough in graphics technology that would far surpass the limitations of the first Unreal Engine. Naturally, this new graphics engine would become known as Unreal Engine 2, and with this new development, the Unreal developing team decided to incorporate the engine with the new game. But with all this going on, there were some underlying issues going on with both Epic Games and Infogrames. Despite the successes that both companies had seen, money was still an issue. Unreal Tournament was seen to be one of the greatest PC games ever made, possibly being an instant classic, but the fact of the matter remains that Unreal was beaten in the commercial war against id's Quake 3 Arena. Although both being a fantastic release, more people were fans of the Quake franchise than that of Unreal, as Quake had already established itself as a pinnacle of FPS games, and FPS fans were more inclined to go to the id side of the battle, meaning that Unreal Tournament didn't make as much money as it could have. The new projects that the Unreal development team were pursuing were also very large, expensive and risky, and if the new Unreal Tournament turned out to be a commercial failure, then either one or both of the relevant companies would face bankruptcy. In the end, it didn't matter. Infogrames went through an administrational revolution as it started to take over other companies, and was later renamed to coincide with its brother company that it eventually merged with, Atari Incorporate. Now, what do we all think of when we hear the name Atari? We might think of some sort of late 1970s video game classics such as Pitfall or Space Invaders. Or maybe some not so classics such as Pac-Man or E.T. Well, around the 2000s, Atari would return under a different guise as Atari Interactive Incorporate. This company was in fact related to Infogrames, and when the merger was complete, Atari was the final name chosen. With the admin change complete, the Unreal developing team underwent an overhaul. Epic Games threw more money into it, more ideas were thrown about, and big plans for the series was put in motion. Unfortunately, whilst the development of the Unreal franchise had been in the hands of both Epic Games and Digital Extremes up until this point, Atari had their own designs upon the future of the series, and whilst this wasn't exactly an issue to begin with, and whilst the developing was almost exclusively in the hands of both the developing teams, this would eventually lead to a family feud and the franchise's decline. Unreal Engine 2 was completed and 3 new games were announced. This came as a surprise as previously only the one game was known to the public, though this itself had some surprises in waiting. Unreal Tournament 2 would still be released, but underwent some drastic changes during development. Due to the huge amount of work that went into the making of the new Unreal Engine, most of the development that went into Unreal Tournament 2 wasn't actually done by Epic Games. Instead, it was worked on mainly by their partners in crime, Digital Extremes. With this game in their hands, Digital could do almost what they wanted with it. In fact, most of the game developed up until this point was scrapped, and in its place, a new tournament was proclaimed as Unreal Tournament 2003. This name initially confused gamers. Why 2003? What was wrong with Tournament 2? Well, Epic Games later went on to explain this by stating that they wanted to turn the Unreal Tournament side of the franchise into more of a sports game than a hectic shooter, by releasing new games in the style of sports games seen by such companies as EA Sports. It's in the game. As their title was always named by the sport and then the year it was released, so too was the Unreal Tournament games to be named as such. The second game to be announced would be a console port of Unreal Tournament 2003 named Unreal Championship, whilst the third game would be a sequel to the original Unreal game entitled Unreal 2 The Awakening, but these last two are both stories for another time. The first screenshots of Tournament 2003 were released and news of this game became available. Along with new graphics came new everything. Brand new weapons were available, completely new maps, different game modes, new mods, characters, and so much more. We were f***ing pumped. Unfortunately for us, the story starts to take a turn for the worst at this point, and to those of you who are wondering if these games are worth getting, then you'll be sad to hear what happens next. This game was pretty bad. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't a shit game, but compared to the Leviathan that is Unreal Tournament Game of the Year, Unreal Tournament 2003 fell flat on its face, big time. The game comes on 3 CDs, so you'd be thinking that it's a huge game, but ironically, the game's actually much smaller in content than that of the previous game. Some of the classic gaming modes were still available, such as Deathmatch and Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and while some new ones had been put in, some of the best parts were removed. The Assault mode was completely wiped from the series, along with Rocket Arena. Last Man Standing was also removed, but was relegated to being an option in the Deathmatch setting, and whilst Domination was still included, it had been modified and not for the best. In the first tournament game, the mode was called Domination, in which you have to hold a number of positions for as long as possible in order to build up points. But in Tournament 2003, there were now only 2 positions available, making the game modes much more easy and less adrenaline pumped than before, and this mode they called Double Domination, making it sound more action-packed like it had double the intensity, but ironically it only contained half of the action compared with its predecessor. The only new gaming mode that was included was called Bombing Run, which again ironically enough is basically a reverse Capture the Flag where, instead of grabbing the flag and returning it to your base, you now grab the ball and take it to the enemy's base, and seeing as we already have Capture the Flag, it does make you wonder why we needed to have Bombing Run included in this game at all. However, you cannot fault the developers for trying. There are some clear examples of where Digital Extremes were really trying to improve on the last game. For example, the actual tournament single player campaign is much more interesting, including the introduction of drafting your own team and taking them into battle. Also, each character has their own stats and abilities, meaning some are more of a team player, whilst others are more accurate at shooting. And whilst this last point isn't exactly new, as this feature was also present in the previous game, the emphasis this time around is more on your face. However, when looking at the game on the whole, it's a real shame really, because despite the gameplay being okay, it never really feels like it's anything special. The game modes that are there just feel like the bread and butter of deathmatch based games, but there's none of that something that makes this game stand out. For the previous tournament game, it was Assault, and the fact that you were sport for choice when it came to maps and weapons, but all of this were either removed or drastically reduced, and the public felt like Unreal Tournament 2003 wasn't really living up to its potential. In fact, all of this was waiting for was just one massive expansion pack, but with the lag and performance issues that the game was suffering from already, this was probably not a good idea initially. And so the game remains as it was for the time being, with gameplay that never really felt like it was enough. I mean, let's face it, Deathmatch and Team Deathmatch are basically the same gaming modes, but with a small twist each time. And Capture the Flag and Bombing Run are also very similar. So really, if you combine all the deathmatches into one, and then Capture the Flag and Bombing Run, you really just end up with 3 gaming modes. Wow, choice, eh? Also, the number of maps, special weapons and mutators that are available are much less in number than that in the previous game. So why 3 CDs? Well, the main reason for this was because of the new graphics engine. In some ways, it was too ahead of its time, and most players found some form of performance issue upon release. The reason for this was because most home computers at this time could not fully handle the graphics of this game, and thus a large number of players experienced lag of some description, whether it be minor or major to the point where it was unplayable. For this reason, it could be said that had there been more content within the game itself, players would not have been able to enjoy the game at all due to lag spikes and PC crashes, which is not a good start in itself to the new phase of the franchise. On the other hand, Unreal Engine 2 was in some ways a huge success, although this was a bittersweet victory for the Unreal franchise in itself. Although the new graphics engine was, in every way possible, far superior to that of the previous engine, with very impressive visuals included, the fact that most players' PCs were not capable of running the game at full graphical capacity meant that all of this new eye candy that Unreal Engine 2 was offering was mostly wasted at the start of its life. Then there's the weapons. Some survived the transition from the previous games, and it seemed like the shock rifle, the flat cannon, bio-rifle and minigun were here to stay. However, some of the most fun to use weapons in the previous game were removed. The sniper rifle was completely replaced by the new lightning gun, with its blurred scope vision and slightly inaccurate fire. The enforcer was completely removed and replaced with the less effective assault rifle, previously seen in the Unreal Mission Pack, as was the Ripper, which had also been completely removed. The impact hammer was replaced by the shield gun, which was never really used by players, and the Redeemer, although looking much more colourful and fun to watch, didn't have the power or the oomph that the previous one had. The pulse rifle, however, evolved for the better. Both its primary and secondary fires were more or less left intact, but now the alt-fire mode served a greater purpose by making friendly players' pulse rifles much more capable when used on allies. There are two further additions to make note of before continuing. First off, Adrenaline was added. Adrenaline is gained through picking up pill icons throughout each map, and each pill represents 3 adrenaline points. Once a player has reached 100 adrenaline points, they are able to gain a temporary ability by entering a certain command. These commands usually revolve around the movement keys, so for example, pressing the forward button 4 times quickly will increase your speed. Other abilities include regeneration, increased weapon damage, just to name a few. This was seen by the developing team to give players an edge on the battlefield, but in reality, players didn't really find any use for it. Why increase your weapon damage when you can just get a more powerful weapon, or go for the U damage? The second addition to mention is the acrobatic system. Here we see the introduction of double jumping and wall dodging. A double jump does exactly what it says on the tin. When you're at the height of your jump, press jump again to go twice as high as before. Also, wall dodging is performed by jumping away from a wall if you're standing next to one, the result being that you're shot over a further distance than you would have done if you just simply jumped to the side. All of these were designed to improve the combat experience by allowing players more control over movement, and in the same way as Adrenaline, acrobatics was largely not used by players. Although double jump did indeed come in handy, wall dodging was rarely used, nor was it really needed. Just strafe side to side and put out rounds, that's all you need to do to win the match. Then there's the characters and the story of the game. Both of these issues confuse the hell out of the player. The game is set 9 years after the last one, now at the turn of the 24th century. At the end of the last tournament, a showdown between Malcolm and Zan was fought, with Malcolm coming out on top and winning the tournament. He then goes on to bring in some of his old rivals to enter his own personal team, and the tournament gets changed big time. As king of the tournament, Malcolm welcomes any and all challengers, but what he doesn't realise is that other companies besides the Andry want to get in on this action, and so Axon, a rival industrial corporation, arrives on the scene with their superhuman juggernauts, ready to do battle with the supreme leaders of the tournament. The game starts out with a really shit and cheesy cutscene of a load of people on heat.
How do I look?
Not as good as me, baby.
Aside from the 2 teams I've already mentioned, more robots are featured this time round, which is a welcomed addition, I guess. But then there's the Genmo Kai. The who the what now? Well, here's another thing I've never understood about this game. The Scar and Gnarly, and not to mention Gnarly Warcows or whatever they're called, have been removed completely, and instead we have the not so terrifying alien race known as the Genmo Kai. I couldn't even tell you what they are or why they're here, as I have no f***ing idea. They're just in the tournament for some reason. There are also some really random characters that have no rhyme or reason to be there, like Mr. Crow. Who the f*** is Mr. Crow? Also, remember being able to modify each and every character, or create completely new ones from scratch? Yeah, well good luck trying that here. That shit's been removed along with every other good thing about the previous game. All of this shit never really gets explained that well. And what's with all of the ancient Egyptian levels and characters? Scarab? Horus? Have we gone back in time or what? Some of the Egypt levels do look quite cool, but it feels so out of place in this game. And whilst the first Unreal Tournament was guilty of a couple of Egypt levels, they were quite fun to explore and fight in, and never really gets in the way of that Unreal Tournament feeling. Whereas here, they just went overboard with it. And some of the voice lines are terrible too. The previous game had some really badass, in-your-face finisher lines, but they've all been replaced by shit like this.
No tears, please. It's a waste of good time.
Now that doesn't even make sense. Now, the story, as we'll see in my future video to the sequel of this game, gets killed off, and there's no real Unreal Tournament story until the last entry into the franchise, and you can understand why, though that doesn't make it a good thing. The story in this game got so confusing, random and out of whack that it was almost completely impossible to continue unless you completely forget about what has happened in the past and start afresh. But that's the story for another time. But so far, we've only touched on a small part of the second generation of Unreal games. Stay tuned next time for Unreal 2 The Awakening. See you soon. Hey guys, True Review here. Hey, if you like what you've just seen, then give us a like and subscribe, or if you want to chat about any of the Unreal games, then hit me up in the comments below or send me a message right here on YouTube. Don't forget to check out all the previous True Review videos, or if you're looking for technical support for your PC games, then check out some of Robert Court's tech support videos and try your luck there. See you